thank you for joining the community once again. And yeah, if you could maybe give your background, you've done a tonal talk in the past, which was more oriented for muscle building. But for maybe people who didn't see that, as we transition into understanding the basics of nutrition, can you give people just an overview of who you are and what your background is?
For sure, man. And thanks so much for having me again. It's awesome to be a part of the Tonal community, and I'm really looking forward to tonight's chat. And yeah, I can't thank you enough, Jake. It's been awesome. It's great to see you doing great things with Tonal. Really brief background about myself. Back in 2011, I got involved in the natural bodybuilding world, and from there, it kind of totally changed my trajectory in regards to what I wanted to study and what I wanted to do professionally. So, again, started studying exercise and nutrition sciences, and since then have done a lot of research since 2016 with you at the University of Tampa. And I work with a lot of physique athletes, but also people that are just trying to improve their overall health and body composition through utilizing, science-based training and nutrition strategies. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. It took me quite a while to develop these skills, but I've been coaching people, full time since 2015, and yeah, I've been doing this for a while. So a decade in the transformation space, so to speak, and I absolutely love what I do. So I look forward to helping everybody joining tonight's live.
Awesome, yeah. And sorry for looking if I was discombobulated. I was just checking to see if we were live, and I got a Slack message from a colleague that we were, but I didn't see it pop up on my end. So I will trust that our message is getting out there. And I
Cool.
think your expertise is so perfect for this time of year, where it's a fresh start, and I think losing weight or just like having the fundamental tools to have like a sustainable relationship with your weight is just very top of mind. So I think it's just, yeah, perfect opportunity for us to have this chat. And so what I'll do now is not only did Chris donate his time with us today, he created a PDF guide that has all this information, and he broke it down week by week of what you can focus on in theme with 4 Week Fast Track Accelerate. So what we'll do for the next maybe 30 minutes is sort of go over this guide. I'll pick Chris's brain where we can go over these, fundamentals of the building blocks of nutrition. Maybe take about 20, 30 minutes there, and then open it up to the community to really ask any questions directly to Chris himself. Again, we want to empower everyone at Tonal with all the information they can to put themselves in a position to achieve these goals. And weight loss is one of our goals at Tonal, and it's in our all of the information we put out there that we can give you killer workouts. We can help you burn a bunch of calories, but the nutrition and what you put into it is essential for for building muscle and for losing weight. So that's going to be the goal today, is to empower our members. So with all that jargon covered, I'm going to share my screen, and here we go. So is this a good size, Chris? Can Because I can't really see. Okay.
Yeah, you can maybe zoom out just a touch, so it's a touch smaller, but that looks good.
Okay, let's do a Command Z. All right.
Yeah, that's cool.
So I'll kind of scroll through this just to orient people who haven't seen it before. Again, this is the nutrition guide to pair alongside 4 Week Fast Track Accelerate. It looks beautiful, and as you can see, I've highlighted some points that even stood out to me. I was taking notes in part to sort of guide this conversation, but also just relearning for myself. So again, Chris kind of has these four key themes that you can, almost like challenges for what you should focus on each week as we go through 4 Week Fast Track. So the first one is going to be, empowering people with the tools to track calories daily, to understand what makes up the different macronutrients in our food, some tips for prioritizing nutrient-dense foods, and also the importance of orienting to nutrient-dense foods, and then how to approach your nutrition on training days. So that's going to be the four key themes. And then you can see there's a bunch of great information that we'll cover throughout. So with that being said, let's just get right into it. Uh, Chris, the science of weight loss. Fundamentally, can you tell our community what fundamentally is required to lose weight?
Yeah, absolutely. So, first and foremost, with the new year being here, a lot of people are focused on weight loss. They do like to be objective with losing weight on the scale, and that can be very, very valuable for many. I quickly want to throw in the quick tidbit that depending on where you're currently at, what your current body composition is like, the scale isn't telling you everything that's going on sort of underneath the hood, right? What's happening to your body composition and your health markers. So, because you guys are training on the tonal and you're getting such an awesome resistance training stimulus, you should be building muscle and losing fat simultaneously. But what is absolutely needed to lose body fat over time is to be in a caloric deficit, right? So that essentially means that you need to be eating fewer calories per day than you are burning on a daily basis. And, in this guide, I kind of talk about what are the major components to what makes up your total daily energy expenditure. We'll briefly chat about things like your basal metabolic rate, your physical activity levels, thermic defective food, and everything like that. But it's super important that you do create some sort of caloric deficit. And the easiest way to do that is through tracking your nutrition and being objective with that. There are other ways to go about it, but there is no other fail-proof method rather than tracking, right? Because if you're not being objective with this, you can make good lifestyle changes that can improve your health. It could also improve your mood. But a lot of people do that and they still get frustrated that they're spinning their wheels. They're not seeing the progress they want. They might say, hey, I did cut out, quote unquote, processed foods or things that I know that weren't as good for me, but I still haven't lost weight. Or, I've made improvements to some of my habits, but I still haven't seen the results I want. Well, if you kind of are just frustrated with making some habit changes, but not seeing the results you want, tracking your caloric intake will be like a fail-proof first step to really, really nailing your progress and also basically controlling the rate of progress you're making when it comes to weight loss. So yeah, there's so much that we can dive into and talk about here.
Yeah, I think the you touched on something at the end there that the rate of weight loss is pretty important. And I think that's what you have right after the calories in, calories out, and sort of like starting with the importance of tracking your calories, which I think we'll get into when we touch into week one. But
Mhm.
can you give us a background on, sustainable weight loss and even just making this something that you can take with you beyond 4 week fast track. So it's not just this, mini cut that is unsustainable. Can you walk us through some of these guidelines that
Yeah, absolutely. So in the guide, you'll see that I do recommend that you aim to lose around 0.5% of your body weight to 1% of your body weight per week. And then as you'll see on the screen, for a 200-pound person, that's obviously 1 to 2 pounds per week. The reason why that is so important is because a lot of people kind of set these really large goals that their timelines don't necessarily align with a sustainable, healthy approach. So somebody might say, hey, January 1st came, I want to lose 20 pounds this month, but that person may be, 180 pounds. And if they were to lose 20 pounds, it would be really, really aggressive. It would be really painful, and it wouldn't be ideal for their health in any manner. It would also lead to a less ideal body composition transformation. So even though they would lose 20 pounds of scale weight, they probably would lose a good chunk or a large percentage of that 20 pounds would also be lean body mass as well as fat mass. What I like to do with the people I work with and the way I try to educate people is we want to maximize fat loss while preserving muscle or building muscle simultaneously. And by being overly aggressive with your diet or by ensuring that that magnitude of the deficit is too large, you're actually shooting yourself in the foot and you can be doing more harm than good. So it's really important that you're in a relatively small deficit, and that's going to lead to a lot less hunger, a lot better performance, and a lot better recovery and better adaptation. So again, more muscle gain, and the larger percent of that weight loss is actually coming from fat. And that's super, super important.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the chat open, but I imagine that the notion of maximizing fat loss and minimizing muscle loss and potentially gaining muscle and losing fat is going to resonate really well with the community. And if anyone's interested, I know Chris has a paper on that topic around body recomposition in the Strength and Conditioning Journal for a future resource. But I think that's something to keep in the back of the mind as we go through this list is, again, our goal is sustainable weight loss that you can take with you after 4 week fast track. Want to maximize fat loss and maintain, if not increase, muscle mass along that process.
Mhm.
Uh, Now, as we move forward, before diving into that week one, this was a figure that you put in here that really just resonated with me. It's very simple, and I would love if you could just maybe start with because you mentioned calories in, calories out. So to lose weight, we have to burn more calories than we're taking in. So then we're taking in. So what goes into the amount of calories that we're burning every day? Because I think fundamentally that's a lever that we have to be really aware of if it's something we want to manipulate. So could you just give people an overview of this figure and what total daily energy expenditure is?
For sure, yeah. So I want people to be very familiar with like both sides of that scale that makes up your overall energy balance, right? So if you have your expenditure on one side and your intake on one side, well, we know, okay, our intake is made up of the calories we're consuming, and that comes from the macronutrients we consume. So our fats, our carbs, our protein, as well as our alcohol, right? On the other side of that scale is we have our energy expenditure and our output. So what levers can we actually manipulate on the output side of things, right? The thing that makes up the largest percentage of our total daily energy expenditure, of the amount of calories we burn on a daily basis, is our basal metabolic rate. And all that means is the amount of calories we burn at rest. So if you were to lay down for 24 hours straight, how many calories would your body burn just to go through all the metabolic processes and maintain its current status, essentially, right? That is the largest percentage of our energy expenditure, but we can't really influence that and manipulate it to a large degree in an acute fashion. Like we can't change that lever right now, right? Um, but something that does kind of impact that is like, for example, having a cup of coffee, that actually increases your metabolic rate a little bit because it's increasing your heart rate. So you're burning a little bit more calories even though you're at rest. That's just an example. But that's not really a lever you can pull. The biggest way that you can manipulate your basal metabolic rate over time is by gaining muscle. And that's because muscle tissue is more thermically active. It burns more energy than fat mass does, right? So over time, your BMR should go up when you're training with tonal because you should be building muscle, and that is freaking awesome. It's great for your health for a lot of reasons, but it's also going to allow you to eat more food. And sometimes I don't even like using the term allow. You're almost going to need more food just to feel good and perform good and recover well. So that's an awesome component of it. Now, the other things that we can control from the expenditure side of the equation is your physical activity levels as well as the thermic effect of food. So everybody knows that you can manipulate your physical activity levels. Some people might be overdoing cardio, right? Some people might be doing two a days on a very regular basis. Some people talk about just increasing their step count on a daily basis, which is a really, really good tool for a lot of people because it's very low stress, very, very easy to implement into your lifestyle and has a host of other benefits. And then that third component again is the thermic effect of food. So that can be manipulated by changing your diet because we understand that protein is the most thermogenic macronutrient, and therefore you're actually burning more calories just to digest, absorb, and utilize those nutrients. And that can tip the scale of the energy balance equation in your favor and actually put you in a caloric deficit or enhance fat loss without you feeling any sort of negative side effects or without you feeling more hungry, as if you just decreased your actual total caloric intake or increase your physical activity level. So these are nice tools in the toolbox that you can manipulate and you should be familiar with. So you have the choice of what you want to do and what fits into your lifestyle the best.
That's awesome. I definitely want to double click and give people an understanding of what you mean by thermic effect of food. But even before that, something that it's very simple, but the way you guys put this together that really stood out to me is I think it's well understood that yes, building muscle is going to increase your basal metabolic rate. But when you paired it, when you're looking at the levers involved in weight loss, it's strength training and building muscle is also going to be paired with this like physical activity. So you're going to burn calories. It's kind of like you're making an investment, like short term and long term when you're working out, because you're burning calories in that workout and you're also like laying the foundation for sustained weight loss as you're increasing this muscle mass for the future. And I don't know, I just thought it was really nice that you guys put that together in there. But I would love, because I think you give more in this next section, you touch on using physical activity, and you mentioned increasing your step count. But you also touched on the thermogenic effect of food. And that's something
Mhm.
that maybe some of our community members might not be aware of. So could you touch on that a little bit and maybe reference that Bill Campbell study and why protein is such an important macronutrient when it comes to maximizing that effect?
Sure, absolutely. So there's a few things I'll touch on in relation to this topic. So one thing that the listeners have probably heard hundreds of times is that a calorie is a calorie. And that's true in a vacuum. And if people understand, a calorie is just a unit of measurement, right? And it's generally correlated with how much energy is required to raise this environment by X amount of degrees. It doesn't actually work that simply in our body from a physiological standpoint. So I'll provide a couple of different examples. We understand that 1 gram of carb and 1 gram of protein both provide us with 4 calories, right? That's what's written in all the textbooks, and that's what we understand. But we also know that 1 gram of protein is more thermogenic than that 1 gram of carbohydrate, or we can say 100 grams of protein and 100 grams of carbohydrate, right? So even though the caloric intake is supposed to be identical, the caloric expenditure, that thermic effect of that food is different. So if you take somebody and you give them a 2,400 calorie diet, right? There's diet A and diet B, and they're both 2,400 calories, but diet B is higher in protein, that is actually going to tip that individual's energy balance scale to essentially create some sort of caloric deficit, or because that thermic effect of food is higher, it's going to change their body composition. It's going to have a different physiological impact. Now, another thing that is just constantly kind of talked about when it comes to thermic defective food is just protein, but I want to provide another example as well. Just because 1 gram of carbohydrate equals 4 calories doesn't mean that all carbohydrates are created equal as well. So if I drink 40 grams of carbohydrate from Gatorade, or if I have 40 grams of carbohydrate from sweet potato, the thermic effect of food is going to be drastically different because that sweet potato is a complex carbohydrate, right, made up of polysaccharides that need to be digested. So it needs to be cleaved off and made into a smaller molecule. It's also going to have a good amount of fiber in there that increases the thermic effect. Whereas that 40 grams of carbohydrate that is coming from something like a Gatorade, the caloric intake on the labels would be identical, but it's going to have a lower thermic effect because it's a simple carbohydrate. Your body can rapidly absorb that, and there really isn't much of a digestion process. So I just wanted to provide that. So foods that are higher in fiber, or even carbohydrates that are more complex compared to simple, the caloric intake might look identical, but again, the caloric expenditure, that TEF, is going to be a little bit different. And over time, that can make a difference. And that's one reason why high protein diets in the literature always outperform calorie equated diets with lower protein. Interestingly, you'll even see in the literature that a lot of times high protein diets outperform lower calorie diets in fat loss when a group is eating 300 more calories per day or 500 calories more day, if those calories are coming from an increase in protein. So it's very, very beneficial for fat loss from what we see in the literature and obviously what we see in the real world, like anecdotally, what I see with my clients, makes a very, very big difference.
Yeah, I know. I mean, protein was the center of the conversation when we were talking about strategies for building muscle. And I know later on this section, you talk about the importance of having whole food sources and fiber when it comes to increasing satiety for weight loss. Because if you are gradually trying to, reduce the amount of calories you're consuming, you don't want to feel hungry. So it's kind of like this sort of perfect effect between protein and fiber being, good for maintaining increasing muscle, making you feel full, so you don't feel sort of the downsides of what it's like to be in a calorie deficit. Um, but now just sort of like following the logic you laid out for us, with that as a foundation, we are understanding our total energy expenditure, and you mentioned that BMR. We don't have to go through this because we have this resource here, but can you just give us like an high level overview of why should someone track their calories to start in this week one? And what's that process look like for someone to have like a rough understanding of how many calories should they be looking to consume?
Sure. So to start off with, how many calories should one consume? Individual differences are quite large, right? So just because you have a male or a female that's the same age, that's a similar body weight, doesn't mean that they're going to require the same amount of calories. So you might have a friend, a family member, or a neighbor that you kind of know just can eat more than you and they handle food better than you. So these calorie calculators are usually great for about 70% of the population, but we have like outliers on both sides of the equation. So the best way to know how many calories you need to consume is to sort of track what you've been doing over the last week, month, or more, and see where that caloric intake puts you at. And then ask yourself, have you been maintaining weight, gaining weight, or losing weight? And from there, you can manipulate it. If you aren't doing like a dietary recall process, you can start tracking your calories now without necessarily totally revamping what you do nutritionally. See what that intake is at, and then ask yourself, what can I improve? What changes can I make that would kind of align with my goals, right? So if you start tracking your calories right now and you realize that, hey, I've been maintaining my weight, but I'm not liking how I feel and I'm not super happy with my body composition, but your protein intake is lower than what we suggest in this guide, then don't make a drastic change. Just think about maybe increasing protein in every single meal. Um, if you've been gaining weight at a rate that you're unhappy with, and the main goal is more of fat loss, then you need to take that current caloric intake and definitely start slashing some off of that, right? So there's a lot of approaches that we can take, but being objective is so important because it's going to empower you to make changes that you're being intentional with and you're predicting what the outcome is going to be based on the adjustment that you're making. If somebody were to talk about business metrics or financials, they're going to talk about like objective numbers in regards to how they can improve an XYZ thing. But a lot of times when people talk about weight loss, even though they're focused on a number on the scale, they don't want to talk about numbers when it comes to calories. They don't want to objectify the amount of energy they're getting from the food they're eating. But it's truly a fail-proof way to do it, right? Otherwise, you're kind of shooting in the dark. A training example would almost be like if somebody were to run 1 mile around the track, but not track how quickly they did that in. And then the next time they run that 1 mile, they probably made some improvement in terms of the time that they ran it, but they don't really know. So like we need to objectify some of these numbers. And obviously, if you're training with the tonal, you know how important these numbers and volume metrics can be to kind of support the adaptations you're looking to impose on the body.
Yeah, I have baby brain, so forgive me if this is a bad analogy, but it's almost like inverse progressive overload, where our members now have weekly targets so we can gradually increase their exposure so we can be objective to make sure that they're having exposure to the stimulus more and more each week to help them build more muscle, more strength, more power, where
Hmm.
it's almost like the inverse of that, where if they didn't have any recommendations for how much volume to do this week, then they could feel like I'm eating healthy or I'm strength training, but I'm not progressing. Where if I'm eating healthy, but I don't know how many calories are, it's going to be hard for me to know what levers to pull. So I think you kind of outlined two different approaches where it was either use this BMR calculator to get a rough estimation of where you are, or just start tracking to see where you are and see what those trends are. But both
Hmm.
of those options, which I think are great options, both come back to empowering yourself with objective information about how many calories you're consuming. And this isn't only something that is for beginners. John Christie, I'm not sure if he's in the chat or on this call, but he's on the Tonal team. He's a registered dietitian, and we meet up roughly once a month. And pretty much once a quarter, I'll notice that he's tracking his macros just to kind of see where he's at in a given period in time. And I think it's such an important skill because as we'd have conversations in the past, Chris, once you track macros, once you understand portion sizes, it's a skill that lasts with you beyond the scale. So in a
Hmm.
couple of months, once you understand how to construct these meals as we go through these tips, you'll be able to have a rough estimation and put yourself in a position to take care of yourself, with tracking or without tracking.
100%. Yeah, it's something that we kind of touched upon before hopping on here was, the difference between eyeballing it versus using a food scale and actually weighing out your food for some period of time. What happens is if you just start with eyeballing it, or maybe you're using like just volume metrics, you're using cups rather than weighing in grams and ounces, that is a much better starting point than not tracking your food at all. But what happens is a lot of times people are eyeballing their food, and even though they're tracking what they think they're eating, they end up underreporting and they also end up not making progress and spinning their wheels. So this happens all the time. You see it in research studies where people significantly underreport how much they truly ate. And again, if you're eyeballing it, you might be off by 25, 30-ish% of your total caloric intake. And that right there is the difference from being in maintenance to a deficit, or like right now you're eating in a caloric surplus without really knowing, and then you drop that 25-30%, you're in maintenance or into a calorie deficit. So tracking, again, it's just fail proof. It's not something you need to do for the long haul, but it's a skill that will teach you so much about portion sizes, and it's something that will be very, very empowering and effective.
I think, yeah, the skill for portion sizes, again, I think that's something that you can take with you on your holistic health journey. But I think what you mentioned, I think there's a slide in here about like avoiding sneaky calories is something that
Hmm.
I think we all have friends that when we're talking about and they're just like, yeah, I'm struggling to lose weight. And it'd be a shame if you're working out, you're doing everything right, and you're even weighing your food, but I feel personally attacked here. I didn't realize 2 tablespoons of butter is 20 grams of fat. And so if you think about that, it only takes one or two of those, sneaky calorically dense snacks or foods, like you said, to just like completely disrupt your progress. So again, it doesn't have to be forever, but I love that you had for week one, track your calories. So because, calories in, calories out, if you want to understand that calories in portion, you have to be objective with it.
Hmm.
Week two, the focus was understanding the like macronutrients and how to create a balanced meal. Um,
Hmm.
is there anything in this topic that you wanted to cover? Obviously, we touched on protein a little bit. But
Hmm.
yeah, anything on the role of proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, or maybe even just like touching on, we have total calories, what those macronutrients are that make them up. I'll sort of flip it to.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. So, generally speaking, I think it's important that you build your meals around protein as being like the base or that staple. And then the carbohydrates and fat can depend on what time of day it is and what you're doing at that time of day. So, generally speaking, for me, if I am going to be more sedentary, sitting at my desk, working, not getting much movement in, I generally construct my meal with protein being the primary thing. And sometimes in those meals where I know I'm going to be sedentary for the next 4 to 6 hours or whatever it may be, it's probably going to be slightly higher in fat and slightly lower in carb. What that's going to do is it's probably going to keep me satiated for a longer period of time. So I'm not going to be thinking about food because I'm not going to get this blood sugar response. And it generally also helps me like cognitively. Like sometimes I can just focus better. I can lock into work a little bit better. But then if I'm, maybe getting into a pre-workout meal or I know I'm going to be physically active, um, the protein is still going to remain the base. I'm going to try to get for myself personally, it's usually like 35 to 55 grams of protein in a meal. But in those other meals, the fats are now going to drop and the carbohydrates are going to come up because I want an energy source that I can utilize really, really well, digest a bit easier and everything like that. So generally speaking, again, protein is that primary staple, and then I build out the rest of the meal around it. If I want to stay full for a long period of time, it's going to be higher in fiber, maybe more vegetable content. If it's pre or post workout, it's probably going to be much lower in fiber, but I'm going to throw in some sort of fruit source. So that's an easy way that I ensure I'm getting in a variety of micronutrients throughout the day as I'm getting my vitamins, minerals, and phytonutrients in. But yeah, just really start with building your meals around protein. I think a lot of people undershoot their protein, whether it's a meal or a snack. In Western world and American society, a lot of us just have a very significant protein feeding for dinner, but sometimes we're kind of undershooting it or missing the mark when it comes to breakfast and lunch. And a lot of things are marketed as like being high protein if they have like 12 or 15 grams of protein. And generally speaking, that's just not enough. So you want to make sure that you're focusing on protein as the staple and then building out the rest of the meal around that.
I love it. And I think your week four is, manipulating your workout day meals and your non-workout day meals. So
Hmm.
touch on that again there. But I just wanted to sort of like reiterate and double down on your notion of like focusing on protein and maybe people accidentally undershooting it because you've stated how important it is. And as a reference here, you have, 0.8 to 1.2 grams of protein. And I highlighted this per pound of body weight. I think a lot of
Hmm.
times you'll see this recommendation come across in per kilogram,
Hmm.
but per pound. So I think, if you have a 150-pound person should have 120 grams of protein. And so I think if you're not diligent about that, then you can sort of undershoot that on accident, which can impede your progress. So I think that if there's one takeaway, it's to, or maybe two, track your calories at the minimum to, or not at the minimum. You want to know your total calories, but also have this rough estimation of what your protein intake is. And it sounds like you're also saying you can be flexible with your carbs and fat to help you reach that total calorie. So if my want to be in a 200 calorie deficit, my, energy expenditure is 2,500. I want to get 23, and I have a protein target of, 120. That's kind of what I'm going to orient to is how do I get to 120 grams of protein and then I'll fill the carbs and fats in sort of at my leisure. I think if
Hmm.
that's like one framework that people can take away, I think that would be helpful. But now I think I want to maybe just chat for about like 5 more minutes and then flip this to get a question. But
Hmm.
there's one thing that I really wanted to double down on in this next section, which you have is like prioritizing these whole food sources. And because
Hmm.
I think if you're increasing your physical activity and you're undershooting your calories, even if you do it moderately, I think what's the hardest thing about doing a diet is you're going to be hungry. So I think you as an expert, I think you put some great tips in here when it comes to having fiber and some of these like high volume foods. Can you maybe just go on like a 4 minute riff of how you use that lever to keep your clients happy as they go through this process with fiber and high volume foods?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So there's a lot of things to consider here. Again, generally speaking, if you're not really conscious and intentional with your nutrition, when you go into a caloric deficit and you're eating less macronutrients, generally speaking, you're also going to be eating less micronutrients with that. However, if you're intentional about it and you're eating really nutrient dense foods, you're getting in plenty of fruits and vegetables, your micronutrient intake won't necessarily drop off that much at all, or maybe you're even eating more micronutrients than you used to because you're eating so much better than you previously were. That's going to make you feel much better from a mood perspective, a cognitive perspective. It will improve your performance, it will improve your recovery, and it can potentially enhance the adaptations that we're seeking, right? So you're getting stronger, you're putting on more muscle, perhaps you're enhancing your fat loss because you're not having some of these negative hormonal changes that can occur when you enter a caloric deficit. So it is really, really beneficial to focus on your micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, and again, just getting in those whole food nutrient dense items are really, really important. Another benefit there is that it is going to be more satiating when you're getting in a good amount of fiber and food volume. One of the ways our body signals, at least acutely, whether we're hungry or not, isn't necessarily based on the amount of calories we're consuming. It's about the expansion of our stomach and how full our stomach actually feels. So one way to sort of like biohack that is just by consuming lower calorie but more voluminous foods, right? So for example, if it was just a caloric intake thing, somebody would get really full by eating 1/4 of the potato chip bag because they're getting plenty of calories from those potato chips, but it's actually not satiating at all, right? However, if they were actually eating like baked potato, they would fill up way, way faster. And it's really hard to overconsume that because it is filling up your stomach and you're going to get this natural biofeedback signal that, hey, I'm satiated, I'm full. Please don't put more food in me. So you do want to put yourself in the best position to not experience these negatives that can come along with dieting. I think being slightly hungry or being okay and understanding that being hunger can be a normal sort of side effect of dieting and of focusing on fat loss. I think it's important to understand that that is sort of normal, but it's also cool to say, hey, I'm going to be intentional to minimize how much hunger I feel. And honestly, a lot of people, if they do this well with a high protein diet and voluminous nutrient dense foods, they won't really deal with hunger at all until they get to a body fat level that their body is really not used to. Or maybe that's actually below their like healthy settling point. So, hunger should and could be a normal part of dieting, but there are a lot of strategies that can mitigate that. And again, if you want to tip the scale in your favor to success, that is one way to do it. I think it's important to quickly mention a lot of people successfully lose weight. They have a big, big problem keeping it off. So that is usually due to taking a unsustainable approach. That is another reason why thousands of different methods do work, whether it's keto or paleo or super low carb or whatever it may be. There are a lot of methods that work because it's going to put you in a large caloric deficit. But if you're not learning about why it worked, you're not able to control what to do in the future and how to sustain that. And that's what I really want to try to nail home today. Hopefully, I can answer some questions to the audience that would help them for the long haul because everyone understands that, hey, if I get really, really strict with my food intake, or if I just start eating less and working out more, I'm going to lose weight. However, it's like, how can we do this the right way? How can we do this the best way? How can we shift the mindset from not just being about weight loss on the scale, but about being about maximizing our overall health, enhancing fat loss and improving muscle gain and strength adaptations, and again, not being overly focused on the scale. One thing I quickly want to add in too is for anyone going through like a transformation phase right now, utilize other tools aside from your actual body weight, right? So I'm a huge fan of taking at least a waist circumference measurement, maybe once a month or once every 2 months, because you might lose very little weight on the scale, but you might lose a decent amount of inches around the waist, depending on where you're at, right? So everyone's in a different spot. Everyone has different goals. Um, some people can realistically lose maybe 30 pounds of total weight. And hopefully in that case, they lose 35 pounds of fat and they put on 5 pounds of muscle or whatever. So they're still at that 30 pounds of weight loss. Other people, they might only, want to clean up 5 to 15 pounds or whatever it may be. And that's going to look drastically different. So we could potentially talk about that, or I'll just, happily take in some questions a little bit later on.
Thank you. That was, I think, a great ending. Before we flip it to questions, I'll add two minor notes. One, I think the biggest thing that helped me when it came to trying to have a healthy relationship with food was nailing this sweet tooth, because that was something that I could have a great meal, but if I had a cookie, or then that would lead to three or four. And the like cheat code for me has been frozen blueberries. And it's sort of
Nice.
this combo of it's high fiber, and it's also cold, so it's tough to eat a lot of, and it's rich in micronutrients. And now I eat like three servings of those from Costco uh, at night, and now I don't have a sweet tooth anymore. So that's kind of like just that sort of shift makes me full, makes me happy, gives me micronutrients. So that's if anyone's out there, I think anyone who works at Tonal is sick of me saying that because I talk about blueberries more than I talk about strength training. But I just wanted to get that in, and maybe do a quick summary, but I think I've been talking too much. So, yeah, the last note I had was we didn't really touch on it, but I think another lever that's important, because one of our Tonal employees came up to us and they were saying, I'm tracking my food, I'm strength training. And you mentioned it early on, but the notion of just like physical activity at large, when you talked about like increasing your step count, I think that is such a great tool to add to your, toolbox when it comes to throwing everything at sustainable weight loss. It's get your workouts in, be mindful of food, but try to get some steps in throughout the day, because I think that's a really important one. Um,
Yeah.
any final notes before I pull up the chat for some questions?
Yeah, I actually want to kind of piggyback off what you said. And you mentioned the snack that you really enjoy and something that you're doing at night that's like helping you kind of sustain good eating habits. I absolutely love the food that I eat. So just because you're being conscious and intentional with your nutrition, this does not mean that you need to be eating bland foods, right? So please make sure you check out some of the recipes that Tonal's been putting out. I was able to collaborate on them with some of those. And I enjoy my food on a daily basis. I make sure that I consume like a piece of dark chocolate on a very daily basis. I have a serving of that very, very regularly. At night, I regularly do fat-free Greek yogurt with a scoop of very delicious whey protein with some sort of frozen fruit, and that literally tastes like ice cream to me. If you have a really good tasting whey protein and you add it to Greek yogurt, it's creamy, it's delicious. It tastes like ice cream to me. It definitely scratches that itch. So you do want to find ways that you just absolutely love the nutrients you're putting in your body. Not only the way it's making you feel, but you want to enjoy the flavor profiles as well. So yeah, great point there. And this should be something that you do for the rest of your life, not something that you do for 4 weeks or 8 weeks or 16 weeks. So yeah, this is something that we want to help people learn forever.
Maybe we can have a separate tonal talk where we just go over our favorite
Our
snacks.
favorite foods.
I know, I think there's a Slack channel on people who have a Ninja Creamy and all these recipes
Yeah,
that you can make, and these, high protein yogurts and smoothies. Like you said, it doesn't have to be bland broccoli and rice. It can be
yeah,
creating tasty, micro and macronutrient dense and sustainable
100%.
stuff. Um, I'm in the Facebook group now. I'm seeing myself on two screens, which is kind of freaking me out. And I don't see, and I see some chatter, but I'm not seeing any questions. So if anyone is live and has a question that they want to ask for Chris, you can put it in there now. And if you missed anything, the guide is very informative. It covers a lot of stuff we didn't get to touch on, and hopefully there's a recap here. but I'm seeing some questions come in now. So I'll shout them out to you, Chris. We have from
Sure.
Katie. Um, 43 female. I put on about 25 pounds of muscle. I tend to bounce too low in body fat. I get down to 12% with hormones. I don't want to get that low. I'm eating 3,000 calories in perimenopause. Uh, I'm not seeing the question in there.
I guess she doesn't want to stay that lean year round, perhaps. Maybe it's like one of those good problems to have. Am I interpreting that right?
Maybe she can follow up and that we
Okay.
can pivot to the next one. So, Katie, yeah, if you want to
Sure.
add on to that, from Taylor, the kind of dark chocolate. What are you eating, Chris?
Oh man, I know I get it from Sprouts. I feel like the company name, I always butcher it. I feel like there's like X's and O's on it. I always get the dark cherry almond and this like orange citrus one as well. But I forget the exact brand. It's not super high in the cacao number. It's like maybe 55%. It's not like one of those 90% cacaos, but I absolutely love it. The lower the percentage, the lower the fat content, so the lower the calories. So a lot of people are like obsessed with these high percentage dark chocolates. Just get whatever you enjoy and yeah, fit it into your calories and your macros. You're good to go.
I like the HU chocolate. It's pretty expensive, but I have with my blueberries one or two. And Trader Joe's has some good stuff too.
Love it.
From Vidya, we have one of the recipes is cream of rice. Can you talk about that for breakfast?
Yeah, for sure. So one thing I love about cream of rice is basically everybody digests it really, really well. It's considered like one of those hypoallergenic foods, so it's really, really easy on the stomach. The way that we made it with the recipe is with, some sort of nut butter that's going to slow down the digestive process a little bit, but more importantly, decrease that blood sugar response that you would get from cream of rice if you had it by itself. And it's something that you can just easily add protein powder to and kind of flavor it however you like, right? Whatever fruit you enjoy, you could add some cinnamon to that, some salt to that, and make it really, really flavorful. But I like that as a pre-workout or a post-workout. Again, it's just really easy on the stomach. It's providing you with those carbohydrates that you want before exercise or that you may need after you exercise for glycogen replenishment. And it's something that is maybe underutilized or not super common. So that's something that people can explore. Um, yeah, a lot of people eat like oatmeal or uh, a different sort of cereals, but a lot of people are sleeping on the cream of rice. I come from a Middle Eastern background, and we kind of use some of those different food sources myself. So something I implement.
Yeah, I like your note of like easy to digest because I think for people who want to eat something before they work out, if I have a lot of fiber, it takes me a while to digest it. So I think that's a great shout. Related to
Yeah.
your note on oats, Leah said that some people are saying oats can leach nutrients. Yeah, is that true? Is there any truth to that claim?
Yeah, there's a lot of debate about that. It's something I would not stress about by any means. I think there is generally more harm than good when it comes to saying a food is like totally off the table or like this is bad and this is good. I think it's better to understand that there's this gray area and every individual responds a bit differently. So I personally eat oats, I digest them fine. There's actually plenty of micronutrients in there as well and some fiber in there. So I have heard that go around quite a bit. There are a couple of like influencers in the space that made that pretty popular. But if you look at the evidence-based research, I'm happy to share that, or maybe I'll drop it in the comment section here on Facebook that has kind of been debunked. So I'll share that on here as well.
I I really think we have to have you back and do a whole section, a two-part conversation on you know, high protein, macronutrient dense, not sneaky calorically high desserts and snacks, and then also just some of these myths, because I know
Yeah.
that some people who are like vegetables are bad, vegetables are good, and oats are bad, and don't have bananas and blueberries at the same time.
Yeah, yeah,
You could clear that up for us.
for sure.
I know we're running low, but Kitty did clarify her question, so am pulling up to it. Yeah, you were right. She wants to know like how she could avoid getting too low of body fat because she's putting on so much muscle, which is, I think, an amazing problem to have.
Yeah, it's like a good problem to have outside of the norm. But again, these situations do exist. One thing you can consider is like, are there certain components of your day that you're being more physically active than you have to? That's something that you can consider, like potentially decreasing. More importantly, you might just want to increase your total calories, even though I'm assuming you're feeling very full, because I think you mentioned, I remember Jake saying you're eating around 3,000 calories per day. So yeah, it's really going to come down to potentially eating more, but more importantly, you'll be on the opposite side of the spectrum. So you would want to eat foods that don't fill you up, that aren't super satiating, and that you can handle a good amount of without feeling overly full. So for you, like dried fruit might be a great option rather than just whole fruit, right? Because you're going to get no water in there. You're going to get, it's going to be really, really easy to digest, and you can have plenty of calories. You can also use liquid calories. So, like I personally use like pomegranate juice intra-workout. You can drink like fruit juices or liquid calories just to hit your caloric needs without feeling satiated and super full. So you'd be on the opposite end of the spectrum there.
I think we have two questions at the buzzer. I think one should be pretty quick, and then one might take a little longer. So I'll hit you with
Yeah.
those. Um,
No rush on my end, by the way, guys. I'm happy to answer questions.
okay,
Very
cool.
happy to answer
Yeah,
questions.
so if
Yeah.
you guys have any more, you can still put them in there. Um, Susan asked, so I'll give you both of them. Susan asked,
Yeah.
when you're calculating your protein recommendations, should it be based off your current body weight or your goal body weight? And then there's
Mhm.
also just a notion of how does water impact the conversation at large? So maybe we can go, protein recommendations and then
Sure.
water.
Sure. So the protein recommendations. You can use either or, whether it's target body weight. In the ideal scenario, I like using lean body mass, but a lot of people are like, oh, I don't really know what my fat-free mass is or what my lean body mass is. So, just as a quick example, if you have a 200-pound male that is 20% body fat, that means they have 40% fat mass and 160 pounds of lean mass or fat-free mass. So I would use that 160-pound metric and then increase from there. And they would use a metric like it's essentially 1.2 to 1.6 grams per pound of lean mass. Um, However, the recommendation I used in this guide to make it a little bit more general is that zero point 0.8 to 1.2 of your current body weight. Now, with that said, if your body fat percentage right now is much higher than you would like it to be, you can go to that lower end of that scale of that zero point 0.8 to 1.2. If you are very, very lean already and you really want to maximize muscle building, then you want to be closer to the 1.2 and further away from the zero point 0.8. It's not super, super important exactly what your number is. So, just as a quick example, if somebody sets their protein at 150, if they're eating 140 or 160, it's not going to be drastically different. However, if somebody is off by like 40 plus grams per day, that's when it's going to kind of have this negative compound effect. So, yeah, that's going to give you a good ballpark. Feel free to like leave your specific stats if you're comfortable with it in this comment section, and I'll just like give you like my answer for you personally. But yeah, I hope that helps. And then Jake, you asked about water,
Yeah,
how it plays into dieting overall, or just overall health and like satiety and everything like that.
I think so. It kind of came up twice.
Okay,
YouTube chat, someone asked, yeah, just like of this, maybe we'll focus on water when it comes to weight loss, and then
sure.
yeah, we'll start there.
Yeah, so water is super important, especially when you are resistance training, and everyone here is obviously using the tonal. So a lot of people aren't well hydrated, just generally speaking. So one thing I highly recommend you do is you start your day off with a lot of fluid before you start just eating calories, right? So something I personally do is I just first thing in the morning, go downstairs, I get my shaker bottle that I use throughout the day, and I usually fill up like 24 to 30 ounces of water. And I drink that first thing in the morning and kind of start my day in a well hydrated state. And I try to maintain that throughout. One thing I will say too, almost more important than your pre-workout meal is your hydration status. So if you are well fed, but you are dehydrated going to workout, you're not going to perform well. Whereas on the opposite end of the spectrum, maybe you skipped a pre-workout meal, you're not in the best like nutrient status at the moment. If you're really well hydrated, you're still going to perform really well for the, first 30, 40 minutes of a workout. So you want to make sure you're drinking plenty of fluids. I don't love providing like a very blanket number. Some people use a certain amount of liters relative to their body weight for a recommendation. My recommendation comes down to actually urination color. So you want to make sure that when you are urinating, it's multiple times per day, and that it is not super super yellow like apple juice. It is much more on the clearer side of the spectrum, and that's going to be the best way to kind of know whether you're well hydrated or not. Another important thing is a lot of people mistake hunger for dehydration. So just because you're having some sort of, uh, you know, uh, I don't want to say appetite cravings, but just because you're noticing some sort of hunger biofeedback signals and these hunger pangs, doesn't necessarily mean you truly need calories and fuel. You might just need water. So water is super, super important. It's not generally going to like enhance fat loss, but being dehydrated chronically is definitely problematic. What it will do is make sure that you feel well, cognitive function's good, performance and recovery is good, and it will keep you fuller for longer too. So that will help with again satiety and sustainability of the diet, and that's super important overall.
Mm, Thank you. I think John Christie has a question, and we got another one in from videos. Maybe we can hit those two. But my, you know, tidbit to add to that is if you have issues with hydration, my cheat code is Element, the electrolytes. They have a hot chocolate flavor, so that'll be like my afternoon. Instead of my second cup of coffee, I get some water and some electrolytes in there. So if
Nice.
having low water issues, that's a good way to get it in. All right, John Christie, fellow tonaler and a staff member and also my boss. So please, let's do a good job here. He's asking about micronutrient distributions when it comes to people who have different goals and outcomes. And yeah, I'm not sure the outcomes he's referring to, but he's worked with people in the military, and so do your micronutrients differ if you're just trying to maximize weight loss, or if you have alternative like strength and power goals, and go there.
Great, great question. And this is something I wanted to kind of touch on during the guide, going over the guide. One big issue when it comes to micronutrient recommendations as well as macronutrient recommendations, generally speaking, the amounts that you see are the amount required to prevent disease, and it's not even close to the amount required to optimize health. So one issue in our food space right now is that even the fruits and vegetables we're consuming are unfortunately less micronutrient dense. They have less vitamins and minerals than they used to 20 plus years ago. And a large part of that is due to the soil lacking micronutrients, and that's a whole other conversation, the farming systems, yada yada. However, because of that, just because you're eating, a clean diet or a primarily whole food diet, it doesn't always mean you're checking off all your boxes from a micronutrient perspective. It's obviously way better than not, but generally speaking, our micronutrient needs are much higher than like the RDAs or those percentages that you may see on the back of a food label. So with that being said, besides prioritizing micronutrient dense food, that is where supplementation can come into to play. A very, very large percentage of Americans, have significant deficiencies in vitamin D. One mineral that is commonly underconsumed and people are deficient in, especially athletes or people resistance training on a regular basis, is magnesium. So there are some key micronutrients that, again, are underconsumed through our diet, or we're simply not able to get a sufficient amount in, and that's where supplementation can come into play. Um, this can alter again based on age, activity level, and current goals for sure. But it would be hard for me to give any additional specifics without talking about, okay, what population are we going to zoom into?
Yeah, I think he clarified in the chat. So maybe if you do pop in there after the fact, we can go in there. But Vidya,
Okay.
maybe the last like high level question about a lot of times we see questions about how we should consider pre-workout and post-workout foods. Is there any, quick examples that you can share with us on that?
Yeah, for sure. So one thing you mentioned when we were talking about the cream of rice was like, okay, you mentioned that it's easy to digest, and you said before you go into a workout, you don't want to feel super full, right? So something that you need to take into consideration before working out is how far away is my actual training session? Are you training 30 minutes from now, 45 minutes from now, or like 2 hours from now? All that would still be considered a pre-workout meal. So if you're training relatively soon, you want it to be lower in fiber, and potentially you might utilize a simpler carbohydrate. So maybe that meal isn't going to consist of like a complex carb, starchy carb, like a sweet potato. It might just be something more simple like fruits like a banana or something like that if you're training super, super soon. If you're training in like 2 hours from now, that's where you might have more complex carbohydrates and you might pair it with some fibrous vegetables to slow down that digestive process. You might even add some additional fats to slow down digestion. So you don't want to go into your training session feeling super full by any means. This is also why a lot of times I utilize whey protein as my pre-workout protein source rather than something like ground beef or chicken or some sort of whole food if I'm training, again, 30 or 45 minutes after that meal. However, if I'm training 90 minutes plus after that meal, it would be more whole food based. So that's something to consider. If you have a lot of food in your GI system, a lot of blood is going to be in your digestive tract. And if you're going to work out, you obviously want blood to go to the muscles of your extremities. So you kind of don't want to be in this parasympathetic state of resting and digesting when you need sympathetic arousal to really perform and get the training session going. So definitely something to consider. And then real quick, I'll say post-workout. This can sort of depend on time of day for practical reasons. Just as a quick example, if you're training at like 6 p.m. after a normal 9 to 5 workday, as an example, that post-workout meal is probably going to be large in overall size. It's going to be whole food based, might have a lot of fiber in there to keep me full through the rest of the night. Whereas if maybe you're training on lunch break, you're getting in like a 30-minute session on your lunch break or in the middle of the day, that post-workout meal can still be something that's quick and easy to digest. Therefore, 2 to 3 hours later, you actually have an appetite and you can have a whole food meal later on. So you kind of need to see what time of day are you training, what makes the most sense. And some of these things you can kind of like troubleshoot and ask yourself, like, what do you think makes the most sense from a performance standpoint in the gym? And then how I'm going to feel and recover after the gym, what the rest of the day's schedule looks like, and what your needs are. So if anyone has any specific questions, feel free to leave comments, and I'm happy to share kind of more specific advice, but that's like a general overview.
That was really informative. Thank you for that. I think that I've never thought about using whey protein as like a pre-workout source of protein. That's just, I think historically people think about like post-workout shakes. So I think that's something
Yeah.
I might try to incorporate myself. Um,
Cool.
Chris, thank you for your time as always. I appreciate you, and I know the tonal community
Likewise.
appreciates you as well. So yeah, if anyone has any questions, you can leave them in the chat. And if you want to have a follow-up to discuss some of the polarizing topics such as oatmeal, is it bad for you, or broccoli, is it gonna kill you, and anything else, then let us know, and we can invite Chris back to do something more spicy.
Cool.
But until then, thank you, Chris. I appreciate it.
No, thanks so much for having me again, guys. And I would love to hear about everyone's progress while they're on this 4 week fast track. Hopefully, they're implementing some of the recommendations from the guide. And yeah, I would just love to hear about your progress. And I hope everyone has a great 2025 and they crush all their goals and they start the new year off strong and, keep that ball rolling.
Awesome. Well,
Yep.
thank you. Have a good one.
Take care, guys.